It was supposed to be just another evening for Darnell Parker, a hard-working man on his way home after a long shift. But in a matter of minutes, his entire life was about to change. As he drove down a quiet street, flashing red and blue lights suddenly filled his rearview mirror. A police siren blared, forcing him to pull over. His heart pounded. He had done nothing wrong, so why was he being stopped? Officer Bradley approached, his face unreadable. License and registration. Darnell calmly handed them over, keeping both hands visible. But Bradley's expression didn't change. He glanced at the documents, then back at Darnell. "Step out of the car." Darnell hesitated. "Officer, did I do something wrong?" Bradley's tone sharpened. "I said, step out of the car." Feeling trapped, Darnell did as he was told. He moved slowly, making sure not to make any sudden movements. He had seen situations like this before, and they rarely ended well. As soon as he stepped out, Bradley shoved him against the car. "Hey, what are you doing?" Darnell protested. Bradley radioed in. "Suspect resisting arrest." Darnell's eyes widened. Resisting? He hadn't done anything. Nearby, a few bystanders stopped to watch. One woman, Jessica Monroe, instinctively pulled out her phone and began recording. Darnell shook his head. "I'm not resisting. I just want to know what's happening." But Bradley ignored him. He handcuffed Darnell and forced him into the squad car. As Jessica continued recording, Bradley suddenly turned and marched toward her. "Give me your phone." Jessica froze. "What? Why?" "Give me your phone, now." Bradley snatched it from her hands and stuffed it into his pocket. Darnell watched from the back seat, his stomach sinking. They were trying to erase the evidence. As the police car pulled away, Darnell's mind raced. How could he prove the truth? If the evidence was gone, what really happened, and will Darnell be able to prove his innocence? Have you ever seen someone get accused unfairly? What would you do in Darnell's situation? Where are you watching from? Drop your city below. Darnell sat in the courtroom, his hands clenched into fists. His mother, sitting beside him, whispered, "Stay strong." But how could he? He was on trial for something he hadn't done. Across the room, Officer Bradley stood confidently, his uniform crisp, his expression calm. He had done this before, given testimony that no one questioned. The judge called the courtroom to order, and the prosecutor stepped forward. "Your Honor, the defendant, Darnell Parker, resisted arrest and behaved aggressively toward an officer of the law." Darnell's lawyer, Lisa Carter, leaned in. "Stay quiet. Let me handle this." Lisa stood, her voice steady. "Your Honor, my client maintains his innocence. Officer Bradley claims he was resisting, but where's the proof?" The prosecutor smirked. "We have the officer's testimony." Darnell's stomach turned. That was it. Just one man's word against his? Bradley took the stand, his tone even, rehearsed. "I stopped the suspect for a traffic violation. When I asked for ID, he refused and became aggressive. I had no choice but to detain him." Darnell's jaw tightened. A complete lie. Lisa didn't blink. "So, you're saying my client resisted?" "Correct." Lisa tilted her head. "And what about your body cam footage? That would confirm your story, wouldn't it?" Bradley's expression didn't change. "Unfortunately, my body cam malfunctioned." Darnell's mother gasped softly. "Of course it did." Lisa narrowed her eyes. "And the bystander recording, the woman whose phone you confiscated?" Bradley barely hesitated. "I had to secure it as evidence." The judge raised an eyebrow, but the prosecutor quickly moved forward. "Without any proof to dispute Officer Bradley's account, I request we proceed." Lisa exhaled. They were trying to rush this through, to sweep the truth under the rug. But suddenly, from the back of the courtroom, a voice spoke up. "That's not true." The room froze. Darnell turned, eyes widening. It was Jessica Monroe, the woman whose phone had been taken. She stood, holding up something. "I have the video." "Does this video hold the proof Darnell needs to clear his name?" The courtroom fell into a stunned silence as Jessica Monroe held up her phone. Officer Bradley shifted in his seat, his face tightening. "What video?" he muttered, his confidence faltering for the first time. Jessica stepped forward, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "The video you didn't want anyone to see." Lisa Carter, Darnell's lawyer, immediately seized the moment. "Your Honor, I request that this video be submitted as evidence." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Jessica walked to the front of the courtroom, handed her phone to the bailiff, and the judge signaled for the video to be played on the large screen. Officer Bradley crossed his arms, trying to mask his discomfort. As the video loaded, the prosecutor suddenly spoke up. "Objection! How do we know this video hasn't been tampered with?" Lisa shot him a sharp look. "It was taken by a witness, Your Honor. If the prosecution truly believes in justice, they should want to see what really happened." The judge narrowed his eyes at the prosecutor. "Overruled. Play the video." A hush settled over the courtroom as the screen flickered to life. Darnell sat still, his heart pounding. The footage began, showing the exact moment Officer Bradley approached Darnell's car. His voice was clear. "License and registration." Darnell's hands were visible, calmly handing over his documents. The video continued, Bradley ordering him out of the car without reason. Then, without provocation, Bradley shoving Darnell against the vehicle, twisting his arms behind his back. The courtroom gasped. It was all there. Darnell had never resisted. He hadn't done anything wrong. But the most damning part? The video showed Bradley confiscating Jessica's phone. The prosecutor turned pale. Officer Bradley's jaw clenched. Lisa Carter smirked, then turned to Officer Bradley. "So, Officer Bradley, would you like to explain why your sworn testimony completely contradicts what we just saw?" Bradley had no answer. What will the judge do now that the truth has been exposed? The tension in the courtroom was unbearable. Officer Bradley sat frozen, his face pale, as the video continued playing. Every lie he had told was now exposed. The jury watched in stunned silence, and the judge leaned forward, eyes locked onto the screen. Jessica Monroe, the brave witness who had recorded the footage, was still standing, hands clenched at her sides. She had done what so many people were too afraid to do. She had spoken up. Lisa Carter, Darnell's lawyer, turned to her. "Ms. Monroe, can you confirm that this is the original untampered footage?" Jessica nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I uploaded it to the cloud before the officer took my phone. That's the only reason I still have it." Officer Bradley shifted uncomfortably. His confident demeanor was gone, replaced with nervous glances toward the judge and prosecutor. He had been caught, and he knew it. The judge turned to Bradley. "Officer, would you like to explain why your testimony contradicts this video?" Bradley cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I must have remembered it wrong." Lisa let out a short laugh. "Remembered it wrong? You swore under oath that my client resisted. The video shows he did not." She stepped closer. "So, tell us, officer, did you remember it wrong, or did you lie?" The prosecutor tried to intervene. "Your Honor, we should—" But the judge raised a hand. "Enough. I will not have deception in my courtroom." He looked at Darnell. "Mr. Parker, based on this new evidence, I see no reason for these charges to stand." Case dismissed. Darnell exhaled, his body finally releasing the tension he had been holding for weeks. His mother covered her face, tears streaming down her cheeks. Lisa wasn't done yet. "Your Honor, we need to discuss Officer Bradley's actions." The judge nodded, his expression unreadable. There will be consequences for this. What punishment will Officer Bradley face for lying under oath? The courtroom held its breath as the video played on the large screen. Every eye was locked onto the footage, revealing the undeniable truth. In the recording, Darnell was seen calmly handing over his license and registration, keeping both hands visible. His voice was steady, his actions cooperative. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Officer Bradley ordering him out of the car with no clear reason. The next few seconds were damning. The footage clearly showed Bradley shoving Darnell against the vehicle, twisting his arms behind his back before slapping on the handcuffs. Not once did Darnell resist. Not once did he act aggressively. Gasps rippled through the room. Whispers spread like wildfire. The judge's expression darkened. He leaned forward, gripping the bench. "Officer Bradley," he said slowly, his voice dangerously calm. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Officer Bradley shifted in his seat, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He opened his mouth, but for once no words came out. Lisa Carter seized the moment. She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, my client was falsely accused and humiliated. This officer swore under oath that Darnell resisted, yet this video proves otherwise. There needs to be accountability." The judge nodded. "Miss Carter, I agree. We will not tolerate dishonesty in this court." The prosecutor, now looking visibly nervous, cleared his throat. "Your Honor, perhaps this was a misunderstanding." Lisa didn't let it slide. "Misunderstanding? This officer abused his power, arrested an innocent man, and then lied about it in court." She took a step closer. "So, I ask again, what will be done about it?" The judge exhaled slowly, his gaze shifting to Officer Bradley. "There will be consequences." The entire courtroom held its breath. What punishment will Officer Bradley face for his lies? The judge's stern gaze bore into Officer Bradley. The courtroom was silent, thick with tension. "Officer Bradley," the judge said, his voice slow and deliberate. "Explain yourself." Bradley shifted uncomfortably, gripping the arms of his chair. His once confident posture was gone. "Your Honor, I thought—" Bradley stammered, scrambling for words. "Maybe I misremembered the details." Lisa Carter immediately pounced. "Misremembered?" she repeated, her voice sharp. "The video clearly shows that my client never resisted, yet you testified under oath that he did." She stepped forward, eyes locked onto Bradley. "You lied, didn't you?" Bradley's face paled. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The prosecutor, once so sure of his case, now looked rattled. He ran a hand over his tie, shifting nervously in his seat. The judge leaned forward. "Officer Bradley, do you realize the severity of what you've done?" Bradley finally found his voice. "Your Honor, I didn't mean to mislead the court. I was just doing my job." Lisa scoffed. "Your job? Your job is to uphold the law, not twist it to fit your version of events. You arrested an innocent man, destroyed his reputation, and tried to cover it up in this very courtroom." The audience murmured in agreement. The judge let out a slow breath. "This court does not tolerate perjury, Officer Bradley." "I'm referring this case for further legal action." Gasps filled the room. Bradley's career, his reputation, his freedom, all hung in the balance. Lisa wasn't finished. She turned to the prosecutor. "And what about you? You were ready to convict my client based solely on this officer's word. You didn't even check for evidence." The prosecutor's face turned red. He opened his mouth, but the judge cut him off. "Enough. Officer Bradley, until this matter is fully investigated, you are hereby suspended from duty." Bradley sank in his seat, his world crumbling around him. Will Bradley be arrested for perjury? The air in the courtroom was heavy, charged with anticipation. All eyes were on the judge as he picked up his gavel. "This court finds no grounds for the charges against Mr. Parker," the judge declared, his voice firm. "The case against him is dismissed." Darnell's mother covered her face, sobbing with relief. Darnell himself let out a deep breath, tension melting from his shoulders. He had fought for weeks to clear his name, and finally, justice had been served. But the judge wasn't finished. He turned to Officer Bradley, who sat rigid, his knuckles white. "However," the judge continued, "this court does not ignore the blatant misconduct we have witnessed today. Officer Bradley, your testimony was not only misleading, but an outright lie. This court is ordering a full legal review of your actions." Gasps spread through the room. Lisa Carter, Darnell's lawyer, nodded approvingly. "Your Honor, we request that Officer Bradley's case be referred to the district attorney for criminal investigation." The judge held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe that would be appropriate." Bradley's eyes widened. He turned toward the prosecutor, expecting him to intervene. But the prosecutor, still shaken, remained silent. He knew there was no defending what had happened today. The judge banged his gavel once more. "Court is adjourned." The courtroom erupted into whispers. Bradley's career was hanging by a thread, and now he wasn't just facing suspension. He was facing real consequences. Darnell stood up, his mother pulling him into a tight hug. But even as relief washed over him, a bitter truth settled in his mind. The damage had already been done. The false accusations, the arrest, the humiliation, it would be hard to erase from people's minds. Even though he had won in court, the scars remained. Lisa Carter placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We'll make sure he answers for this." Darnell nodded, but the question remained. Would Bradley truly be held accountable, or would he find a way to escape justice? Will Officer Bradley finally pay the price for his actions? A week had passed, but the shockwaves of the courtroom drama were far from over. The headlines were everywhere. Officer charged with perjury after caught lying under oath. Officer Bradley had officially been charged with perjury and misconduct. He was suspended indefinitely, pending trial. For the first time in his career, he was the one facing the system he had once abused. Meanwhile, Darnell's life had completely changed. After being wrongly accused and dragged through the justice system, he was now being asked to share his story on national television. Sitting across from a well-known news anchor, Darnell adjusted his microphone, taking a deep breath. "Darnell, thank you for being here today," the anchor began. "What was going through your mind when Officer Bradley accused you?" Darnell hesitated for a moment, then spoke the truth. "Fear," the anchor nodded. "Fear of what?" Darnell's voice was steady but full of emotion. "Fear that no one would believe me. Fear that my life would be ruined because of a lie." His mother, sitting just off camera, wiped away a tear. The anchor leaned forward. "What do you want people to take away from your story?" Darnell looked directly into the camera. "This happens too often. It needs to stop. People like me, black men, black boys, we are judged before we even get a chance to speak. The truth should matter more than a uniform or a badge." The room fell silent. His words were powerful. The truth had been revealed in the courtroom, but the fight for justice was far from over. The interview went viral within hours. People all over the country were talking about the case, demanding change. But one question still remained. Would this case actually lead to real change in the justice system? Or would it be forgotten like so many others? Will this case spark real change? Or will the system protect Officer Bradley once again? The courtroom was packed once again, but this time, Darnell wasn't the one on trial. Officer Bradley stood before the judge, his once arrogant demeanor replaced by fear. The man who had worn his badge with unchecked authority was now a convicted criminal. The judge's voice rang out across the silent room. For perjury and misconduct, this court sentences you to time behind bars. The gavel struck. Gasps rippled through the audience. Some couldn't believe it. A police officer actually being held accountable. The headlines exploded across the country. Officer who lied under oath sentenced to prison. Darnell watched as Bradley was led away, shackled, his future now uncertain. But for Darnell, this was never just about one officer. He had been given a platform, a voice that others were listening to. Determined to make a difference, Darnell began working with civil rights groups, speaking out about wrongful arrests and racial profiling. He wanted to ensure that no one else would go through what he had. At a local rally, hundreds gathered, holding signs that read "Justice for All" and "End Police Corruption." Darnell stepped up to the microphone, his mother standing proudly beside him. "This case was about more than just me," he said, his voice clear and strong. "This is about every person who has ever been falsely accused, mistreated, or ignored. It's time we demand change." The crowd erupted in applause. More people started coming forward, sharing their own stories of injustice. Investigations were reopened, other officers were being questioned, and a movement had begun. But one question still lingered. Was this only the beginning? Will other officers be exposed for similar lies, or will the system try to cover it up once again? Darnell stood in front of the courthouse, the weight of the past few weeks still heavy on his shoulders. Reporters surrounded him, microphones pointed in his direction, cameras rolling. But this time, he wasn't standing there as a suspect. He was standing there as a man who had fought for his truth, and won. A reporter stepped forward. "Darnell, what do you want people to take away from your case?" Darnell took a deep breath, his voice steady. "This isn't just about me. This is about every innocent person who was lied about, every person who was judged before they even had a chance to defend themselves." His mother, standing beside him, squeezed his hand. She had fought this battle with him every painful step of the way. Lisa Carter, his lawyer, took the mic next. "Darnell is free today because the truth came out. But let's be honest, if that footage hadn't existed, he could have lost everything. The truth will always come out, but only if we fight for it." The reporters nodded, taking notes. A young woman in the crowd raised her voice. "Darnell, what's next for you?" Darnell glanced at his mother, then back at the cameras. "Justice isn't automatic," he said firmly. "We have to demand it." The crowd erupted in applause. As Darnell and his mother walked away from the courthouse, he knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning.